Ever heard someone say the Middle Ages were a dark age? A time when nothing really happened. When everyone was just sitting round, waiting for the Renaissance to kick in. Well, that's a load of hogwash. Seriously, it's one of those historical narratives that's just plain wrong, and honestly, it's a little insulting to the people who lived and worked in that era. Think about it. When we picture the Middle Ages, maybe we see knights in shining armor, jousting, castles, or maybe peasants toiling in the fields. We definitely don't usually think high-tech innovation. But what if I told you that some of the inventions we still rely on today, or that paved the way for modern technology, were actually conceived, developed, and perfected during that so-called Dark Age? I know, right, mind dot blown. The truth is, the Middle Ages, roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, was a period of incredible ingenuity. It was a time of adapting, improving, and building upon existing knowledge, especially knowledge that had been lost or forgotten after the fall of the Roman Empire. People were facing real problems, from surviving harsh winters to defending their castles to figuring out how to mass-produce books. And guess what? They came up with some seriously clever solutions. So, why does this misconception about the Middle Ages as a stagnant period persist? Well, a few reasons. For starters, historical narratives are often shaped by those who came after. The Renaissance, with its emphasis on classical learning and artistic achievement, kind of painted itself as a rebirth, implying that everything that came before was, well, dead. Plus, a lot of medieval inventions were, let's be honest, a bit clunky compared to modern tech. But clunky doesn't mean insignificant. It means they were figuring stuff out. Another reason is that many of these medieval marvels just aren't widely known. They're not the headline-grabbing inventions we associate with later periods, like the steam engine or the light bulb. They're often more subtle, practical innovations that quietly revolutionized daily life. They're the underdogs of the invention world. And that's what we are here to do, to bring these underdogs into the light. Now, when we talk about astonishing medieval inventions, we're not just talking about bigger swords or more elaborate tapestries. We are talking about real technological advancements that had a lasting impact. We're talking about inventions that helped people live longer, travel farther, communicate more effectively, and generally make their lives a little bit easier. And these inventions weren't just random flukes. They were the result of observation, experimentation, and a whole lot of hard work. Think of the sheer determination it would take to design and build a complex machine with nothing but hand tools and a basic understanding of physics. Think of the patience required to painstakingly carve letters into individual blocks of wood to create a printing press. These people were problem solvers, inventors and innovators, and they deserve to be recognized for their contributions. Over the next, well, however long it takes me to explain all this to you in a fun and easy way, we're going to be diving deep into some of the most astonishing, yet often overlooked, inventions of the Middle Ages. We're going to explore the clever mechanics, the groundbreaking engineering, and the sheer ingenuity that made this period so much more than just a dark age. We'll uncover the stories behind the inventions, the people who created them, and the impact they had on the world. Get ready to have your perception of the Middle Ages completely transformed. Because trust me, once you start digging beneath the surface, you'll discover a world of innovation that's both fascinating and incredibly impressive. It's a world of clockwork dreams, water-powered revolutions, and the seeds of modern science and technology. So, buckle up, grab your favorite beverage, because you'll need it to wash down the misinformation, and let us get started. Because what you're about to learn may surprise you. All right, So we often think of the Middle Ages as a time of knights, castles, and, well, not a whole lot of technological advancement, right? But that picture is seriously incomplete. Prepare to have your medieval misconceptions challenged, because we're about to dive into some truly astonishing inventions. Let's kick things off with something that might surprise you: early automation. We're talking about clockwork dreams and heated comforts. Now, when I say automation, you might be thinking of robots on assembly lines. But centuries before that, the seeds of automation were being sown in some pretty unexpected places, like monasteries. It's the 13th century, and monks are trying to keep to a strict schedule of prayers throughout the day. I mean, can you imagine trying to stick to a rigid timetable without an alarm? But these weren't your average wall clocks. These were the earliest mechanical clocks, painstakingly crafted using gears and escapements. It may be hard to believe, but these were cutting-edge technology. The escapement, in particular, was a real game-changer. Basically, it regulated the release of power from a weight or spring, allowing the clock to tick at a consistent rate. No more sundials or relying on someone to guesstimate the time based on the position of the sun. These mechanical marvels allowed monasteries to ring bells at precise intervals, signaling prayer times and bringing a whole new level of order to monastic life. Think about the sheer ingenuity involved. These clocks weren't just telling time. They were complex mechanical systems requiring a deep understanding of mathematics, engineering, and metallurgy. They were a testament to the problem-solving skills of the people who built them, a far cry from the idea that people were somehow intellectually dormant during that era. And these weren't one-offs either. Monasteries all over Europe started building and using these clocks, driving further innovation and refinement. But that's not all. It wasn't just about keeping track of time. It was also about staying warm. Yes, you heard right. Long before central heating was a thing, some castles and abbeys were already figuring out how to heat their buildings more efficiently. They looked to the past, all the way back to the Roman Empire, and revived a technique called the hypercost. You know, those underfloor heating systems those crazy Romans were building. Now, this wasn't exactly the same as Roman engineering. It was a medieval twist. Imagine living in a drafty stone castle in the middle of winter. It sounds so romantic and yet so very, very cold. The hypercost, or rather, the medieval version of it, was a lifesaver. It involved building a furnace that would circulate hot air under the floor of a room or series of rooms. The hot air would rise, warming the floor and, eventually, the entire space. The smoke and fumes were carefully vented outside, preventing the inhabitants from, suffocating. Now, this wasn't cheap or easy to build. It required skilled engineers, a readily available source of fuel, usually wood, and a lot of maintenance. That's why it was typically found in the wealthiest castles and abbeys, places that could afford the upfront investment and ongoing costs. And while it wasn't quite as efficient as modern central heating, it was a huge improvement over open fireplaces, which tended to be smoky, inefficient, and, let's be honest, a bit of a fire hazard. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of heated floors, a luxury that would have been incredibly welcome during those long, cold winters. So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, it's that even in the so-called Dark Ages, people were actively experimenting with technology, innovating, and finding new ways to solve problems. The mechanical clocks and underfloor heating systems of the Middle Ages may not be as flashy or revolutionary as some of the inventions that came later, but they represent important steps forward in human ingenuity. They show us that the desire to automate tasks and improve living conditions wasn't some modern invention. It's something that's been driving us forward for centuries. And it all started, in some ways, with those clockwork dreams and heated comforts in the Middle Ages. These weren't just isolated incidents. These were early examples of a wider trend of technological advancement that often gets overlooked. But trust me, the story doesn't end here. We're just scratching the surface. We'll be digging a bit deeper into the medieval world to uncover some really mind-blowing facts about medieval inventions. Get ready to throw those old stereotypes right out the window. All right, let's dive into something truly fascinating. The often overlooked industrial prowess of medieval monasteries, driven by the humble water wheel. You probably think of monasteries as places of quiet contemplation, maybe some beautiful illuminated manuscripts, chanting monks, and that's definitely part of the picture. But there was a whole other side to these religious communities. A side powered by water and geared towards groundbreaking innovation. Forget just grinding grain. We're talking about a full-blown water-powered revolution. Think of it, a consistent, reliable source of energy just flowing by, literally. Monasteries, often situated along rivers and streams, were perfectly positioned to harness this resource. And they weren't shy about exploiting it. Now, you likely know about the basic water mill, right? Big wheel. Water flows over it, turns, grinds the grain into flour. Essential for feeding the local population. But monasteries took this simple concept and ran with it. They went way beyond just milling, adapting the water wheel to power a whole range of industrial processes, turning their cloisters into early forms of, well, factories. One of the most important of these applications was in the textile industry. Making cloth back then was a seriously labor-intensive process. One key step was fulling, that is, cleaning and thickening woolen cloth to improve its quality. Traditionally, this involved, well, stomping on it. Workers would literally stand in tubs of water and urine. Yes, urine. And pound the cloth with their feet for hours on end. Talk about back-breaking work. But clever monks figured out how to automate this gruesome task using water-powered filling machines. These machines used trip hammers, heavy wooden mallets driven by the water wheel, to repeatedly pound the cloth. Imagine the efficiency boost. The monks could produce far more cloth, and their workers could save their feet and avoid the unpleasantness of urine baths. But the water-powered ingenuity didn't stop there. Monasteries also adapted water wheels to power metalworking hammers. Imagine the sheer force needed to shape iron into tools, weapons, and implements. Blacksmiths would traditionally swing heavy hammers for hours, a tiring and demanding job. By connecting a water wheel to a trip hammer, the monks could automate this process as well, making metal working faster, more efficient, and less reliant on sheer muscle power. This meant more tools, better quality, and a significant advantage in terms of productivity. And let's not forget the humble sawmill. Before the widespread use of water-powered saws, planks had to be laboriously cut by hand, using a saw blade and a whole lot of elbow grease. This was slow, inefficient, and produced uneven results. But with a water-powered sawmill, a single monk could oversee the production of large quantities of perfectly sawn timber. This timber was essential for building everything from houses and barns to bridges and, of course, more monasteries. Think about the implications here. By harnessing water power for milling, fulling, metalworking, and sawing, monasteries became self-sufficient, economically productive centers. They could feed themselves, produce high-quality cloth, manufacture their own tools and implements, and construct their own buildings, all with minimal reliance on outside resources. This economic independence gave them power and influence in their local communities. But it wasn't just about economics. These innovations also had a profound impact on the monks themselves. By automating these labor-intensive tasks, they freed up time for other pursuits, such as scholarship, artistic creation, and, yes, even more prayer. They had more time to dedicate to other intellectual activities. They were becoming leading-edge experimenters and innovators. In a very real sense, monasteries were the Silicon Valleys of the Middle Ages. They were hubs of technological innovation, driven by a combination of practical needs, intellectual curiosity, and a desire to improve efficiency. They were at the forefront of a water-powered revolution that transformed the medieval landscape and laid the groundwork for future industrial development. So, the next time you picture a medieval monastery, don't just think of quiet contemplation and ancient manuscripts. Think of the roaring water wheel, the pounding of the fulling hammer, the clang of the blacksmith's forge, and the whirring of the sawmill. Think of these religious communities as engines of innovation, driving the technological progress of the Middle Ages, one revolution of the water wheel at a time. They prove that invention and religion aren't mutually exclusive, and that even the most peaceful-seeming places can be home to groundbreaking advancements. It is time to give credit where it is due and recognize the monks of the Middle Ages as some of history's unsung industrial pioneers. All right, let us talk about something that truly changed the game in the Middle Ages, the spread of information and the opening up of the world. I'm talking about printing and navigation. These two things, seemingly separate, are actually deeply intertwined, and absolutely essential to understanding how Europe transitioned from the medieval period to the Renaissance and beyond. First, let's tackle printing. Now, when you hear printing, the name Gutenberg probably pops into your head, right? And while Gutenberg's printing press in the 15th century was a huge deal, the concept of movable type actually predates him by quite a bit. We got to give credit where credit is due. Movable type was actually invented in China way back in the 11th century. Think about that for a second. While Europe was still relying on painstaking hand copying of manuscripts, the Chinese were already experimenting with ways to mass-produce text. These early Chinese systems used ceramic or wooden blocks, each with a single character carved onto it. So, why didn't it take off globally right away? Well, the Chinese language has thousands upon thousands of characters, making, creating, and managing a full set of movable type a massive undertaking. The economic advantage just wasn't as significant as it would be in alphabetic languages. Now, back to Europe. Before Gutenberg, there were definitely whispers and experiments happening. Think about it. The demand for books, especially religious texts, was growing. Scribes were working tirelessly, but it was a slow, error-prone process. People were looking for a better way. Some evidence suggests that rudimentary forms of block printing, where entire pages were carved onto wooden blocks, were being used for things like playing cards and religious images. These were precursors, little hints of what was to come. But Gutenberg, in the mid-15th century, he put it all together. He didn't just invent the idea. He perfected the process. He used metal movable type, which was much more durable and precise than wood. He developed a special oil-based ink that adhered well to the metal type and transferred clearly to the paper. And, crucially, he adapted the screw press, which was already being used for winemaking, to create a printing press that could efficiently and consistently produce high-quality prints. The impact was seismic. Suddenly, books could be produced much faster and much cheaper. Information, which had previously been locked away in monasteries and the libraries of the wealthy, started to become more accessible. The printing revolution had begun. Think about the implications. More books meant more people learning to read. More people reading meant more people questioning established ideas. The Renaissance, with its emphasis on humanism and classical learning, was fueled by the increased availability of texts. The Reformation, with its challenge to the authority of the Catholic Church, spread like wildfire thanks to the printed word. Suddenly, ideas could cross borders and reach a much wider audience than ever before. It was a total game changer. Okay, so that's printing. What about navigation? How does that fit into all this? Well, imagine you have all these new books and all these new ideas, but you're still stuck in your little corner of the world. You can't explore, you can't trade, you can't connect with other cultures. That's where advances in navigation come in. Now, again, the Middle Ages weren't exactly starting from scratch here. Mariners had been navigating by the stars for centuries. But relying on the stars has some pretty obvious limitations. What happens when it's cloudy? What happens during the day? That's where two key inventions come into play, the astrolabe and the magnetic compass. The astrolabe, an ancient instrument refined by Islamic scholars, allowed sailors to determine their latitude, their position north or south of the equator, by measuring the angle of the sun or stars above the horizon. It was a complex instrument, requiring a good understanding of astronomy and mathematics, but it allowed for much more precise navigation than simply dead reckoning. And then there's the magnetic compass. The earliest compasses were likely floating needles magnetized by lodestones, a naturally magnetic mineral. By the 12th century, more sophisticated compasses, with a needle mounted on a pivot point, were being used in Europe. The compass provided a reliable indication of direction, regardless of the weather or the time of day. Together, the astrolabe and the compass gave sailors the tools they needed to navigate further and more accurately than ever before. They could venture out of sight of land and explore new territories. They could chart new trade routes and connect distant cultures. This led directly to the Age of Exploration. Think about it. Columbus, Magellan, Vasco da Gama. These explorers wouldn't have been able to achieve their voyages without these navigational tools. They sailed into the unknown, driven by a thirst for knowledge, a desire for wealth, and a belief in their ability to conquer the seas. So what's the connection between printing and navigation? Well, they both represent a fundamental shift in the way people understood the world. Printing made information more accessible, challenging old ideas and fostering new ones. Navigation allowed people to explore the world, expanding their horizons and connecting with other cultures. Together, they created a powerful engine for change, driving Europe out of the Middle Ages and into the modern era. They laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution, the growth of global trade, and the interconnected world we live in today. So, next time you pick up a book or look at a map, remember the astonishing medieval inventions that made it all possible. All right, so we've talked about early automation and water-powered mills. Now, let's dive into something truly mind-blowing, the mechanical marvels crafted during the Islamic Golden Age, specifically focusing on the incredible work of Al-Jazari. When we think of medieval inventors, often our minds jump to Europe. But let me tell you, the Islamic world was absolutely thriving in mathematics, science, and engineering. And Al-Jazari, he was a rock star in that scene. His full name was Abu Ibn Ismail ibn Al-Raz's Al-Jazari, which, yeah, is a bit of a mouthful. Let's stick with Al-Jazari. Okay. He lived in the 12th century, serving as a chief engineer at the Artukid Palace in what is now southeastern Turkey. Now, Al-Jazari wasn't just some guy tinkering in a shed. He was documenting his inventions, creating detailed instructions and diagrams. His most famous work, the Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, is a treasure trove of engineering brilliance. Think of it as a medieval how-to guide, but way more advanced than anything you'd find at your local hardware store. Seriously, we're talking about automatons, intricate clocks, and water-raising machines that would make modern engineers scratch their heads in admiration. Let's start with his clocks, because they're seriously something else. Forget your basic sundial. Al-Jazari was building automated water clocks. These weren't just timekeepers, they were theatrical performances. Imagine this, beautifully crafted mechanical figures that moved and interacted as the clock ticked away. One of his most famous clocks featured a scribe who would actually write the time on a slate. Can you imagine seeing that centuries ago? It would have been absolutely magical. These weren't simple, one-off showpieces either. Al-Jazari was a stickler for accuracy and reliability. He used sophisticated techniques to ensure his clocks kept time consistently, which, let's be honest, was a massive challenge back then. The level of precision is astounding, especially considering the tools he had available. He utilized what is considered to be the first use of the camshaft mechanism, which is a key part of basically all internal combustion engines. But Al-Jazari's genius wasn't limited to clocks. He was also a master of water-raising machines. Living in a region where water was a precious resource, he devised ingenious ways to lift water from rivers and wells. One of his most notable inventions was the sokia, a chain pump that used gears and a crank to efficiently draw water. What's really impressive is his implementation of the crankshaft into his pump devices. The crankshaft helps turn rotational motion into linear motion. And now you can find it in almost every internal combustion engine. This wasn't just some basic bucket-on rope situation. Al-Jazari's sokia was automated, efficient, and designed for long-term use. It was a testament to his understanding of hydraulics and mechanics, and it showcased his ability to solve real-world problems with elegant engineering solutions. Now, let's talk about the automatons. Because, frankly, they're just plain cool. Al-Jazari didn't just build machines, he built mechanical people and animals. He created automated fountains with moving figures, musicians that played instruments on their own, and even robotic peacocks that dispensed soap and water. Think about the implications of this. Centuries before robots became a staple of science fiction, Al-Jazari was creating programmable machines that could perform complex tasks. He basically invented the first programmable robots, folks. He designed these figures with intricate mechanisms, using gears, cams, and water power to control their movements. It's like something straight out of a fantasy novel, but it was real. What's even more remarkable is that Al-Jazari understood the concept of feedback control. He designed some of his automatons to adjust their actions based on external factors, making them even more sophisticated. For example, his automated musicians could adjust the volume of their instruments based on the surrounding noise levels. That's basically early artificial intelligence. The influence of Al-Jazari's work is undeniable. His inventions paved the way for future advancements in engineering and automation. Many of the mechanical principles he pioneered were later adopted and refined by European inventors, contributing to the scientific revolution. It's honestly kind of mind-boggling that more people don't know about him. We have gotten so used to the Eurocentric viewpoint in history that we often overlook the incredible contributions of the Islamic world. Al-Jazari wasn't just a talented engineer. He was a visionary who pushed the boundaries of what was possible in his time. His legacy is a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the importance of recognizing the contributions of all cultures to the advancement of knowledge. He predated similar European advancements by centuries. So, next time you hear someone say the Middle Ages were a technological dark age, remember Al-Jazari. His machines were the stuff of dreams, centuries ahead of his time, proving that innovation wasn't just a European thing. It was a global phenomenon. And we should give credit where credit is due. All right, let's talk about something a little shinier. We're shifting gears now to explore a few less-known advancements in medieval defense and, surprisingly, early science. Think of this section as our high-tech interlude in the Middle Ages. We're diving into armor, locks, and, wait for it, optics. First up, let's talk armor. Forget those clunky, restrictive images you might have of medieval knights lumbering round the battlefield. By the late Middle Ages, armor had become a seriously impressive piece of engineering. We're talking full plate armor, meticulously crafted and surprisingly flexible. I know, right? Flexible armor. It almost sounds like an oxymoron. But hear me out. Think of it less like a solid metal shell and more like a second skin, made of articulated plates carefully sheathed and joined together. These plates were designed to move with the knight, allowing for a full range of motion. We're talking about being able to run, jump, and even somersault in full armor. Okay, maybe not everyone could do somersaults, but the point is, it wasn't the restrictive metal box we often imagine. This level of articulation was achieved through a complex system of rivets, straps, and hinges, all working together to distribute weight and allow for a maximum mobility. Each piece was custom-fitted to the individual knight, ensuring the snug and comfortable fit well, as comfortable as wearing a ton of metal can be anyway. We're not talking about mass-produced, one-size-fits-all armor here. This was bespoke, high-end protection, tailor-made for the elite warriors of the day. And speaking of protection, the armor itself was incredibly strong. It was designed to deflect blows from swords, axes, and lances, protecting the knight from serious injury or even death. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a bulletproof vest, but way cooler looking. The thickness of the plates varied depending on the area of the body they were protecting, with thicker plates protecting vital areas like the chest and head. Crafting this kind of armor was an incredibly skilled profession. Armorers were highly respected artisans, often working for wealthy patrons or even royalty. They weren't just blacksmiths, they were engineers, artists, and craftsmen all rolled into one. They needed a deep understanding of metallurgy, anatomy, and biomechanics to create armor that was both protective and functional. And it wasn't cheap. A suit of full-plate armor was an incredibly expensive investment, costing the equivalent of several years' worth of wages for an average worker. It was a symbol of wealth, status, and military prowess. Owning a suit of armor was like owning a Ferrari and a tank all at the same time. Now, let's move on to something a little smaller but equally fascinating: medieval locks. We're not just talking about simple bolt locks here, we're talking about miniature combination locks and puzzle chests. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a safe deposit box, but way more intricate and ingenious. These locks were often beautifully crafted, made from brass, iron, or even precious metals. They featured complex mechanisms with multiple tumblers, levers, and springs, all working together to secure valuables. Some even had false keyholes or hidden compartments, making them even more difficult to crack. These locks weren't just about security. They were also about artistry and craftsmanship. They were often decorated with intricate engravings, carvings, and other embellishments, making them both functional and beautiful. Some were even designed as miniature works of art, showcasing the skill and ingenuity of the locksmith. Imagine the kind of precision and ingenuity it took to create these tiny mechanisms with the tools available at the time. It's really mind-blowing when you think about it. These locks demonstrate a level of mechanical sophistication that is often overlooked in discussions of the Middle Ages. Okay, now for the really mind-bending stuff. Optics. Yes, you heard that right. Medieval scholars were experimenting with optics and light way earlier than you might think. We're talking about the early use of the camera obscura, a device that projects an image of the outside world onto a darkened surface. Now, the camera obscura wasn't invented in the Middle Ages. It had been known since ancient times. But it was medieval scholars like Roger Bacon and Ibn al-Haytham who really began to explore its scientific potential. Ibn al-Haytham, also known as Al-Hazen, was an 11th century Islamic scholar who is considered to be one of the founders of modern optics. He conducted extensive experiments with lenses, mirrors, and light, and he wrote a groundbreaking book called the Book of Optics that revolutionized the field. In this book, Ibn al-Haytham described the camera obscura and explained how it worked. He used it to study the properties of light and vision, and he made a number of important discoveries about how the human eye perceives images. Roger Bacon, a 13th century English philosopher and scientist, was also fascinated by optics. He studied Ibn al-Haytham's work and conducted his own experiments with lenses and mirrors. He also described the camera obscura in his writings, and he speculated about its potential uses for drawing and perspective. Now, these scholars weren't taking selfies with their camera obscuras. They were using them as scientific instruments to study the nature of light and vision. They weren't just passively observing the world. They were actively experimenting and trying to understand how it worked. The camera obscura wasn't just a scientific curiosity. It also had practical applications. It was used by artists to create accurate drawings and paintings, and it was even used by surveyors to create maps. It was a versatile tool that helped to advance both science and art. So, there you have it, armor, locks, and optics. Three seemingly unrelated topics that all demonstrate the ingenuity and innovation of the Middle Ages. These advancements challenge the common misconception of the period as a time of technological stagnation and reveal a more complex and nuanced picture of medieval society. It's a reminder that even in the so-called Dark Ages, people were still pushing the boundaries of knowledge and technology, laying the groundwork for the scientific and technological revolutions that would follow. So, we've taken a bit of a whirlwind tour through some pretty impressive medieval innovations, haven't we? From the intricate clockwork mechanisms ticking away in monasteries, marking time with surprising precision, to the surprisingly cozy underfloor heating systems rediscovered and improved upon in castles and abbeys. It is clear that the Middle Ages weren't quite the technological Dark Ages that they were often made out to be. Think about it. We explored how water wasn't just used to grind grain, but also to power entire workshops, fulling machines, metal-working hammers, even sawmills. These monasteries were practically early industrial powerhouses, thanks to the humble water wheel. They were applying engineering principles centuries before the Industrial Revolution, completely transforming the way things were made. Then we ventured into the world of knowledge and exploration, the development of movable type, though still in its experimental stages during much of the medieval period, laid the groundwork for the printing revolution that would forever change how information was disseminated. Imagine a world without readily available books. The seeds for that revolution were sown right here, in the workshops and minds of medieval thinkers. And let's not forget the advancements in navigation. The astrolabe and the magnetic compass, tools that allowed mariners to chart their courses and explore the world with greater accuracy than ever before. These weren't just incremental improvements. They were fundamental shifts that opened up new possibilities for trade, exploration, and understanding the world. We also shined a light on the incredible ingenuity of Al-Jazari, a true mechanical genius from the Islamic Golden Age. His automated water clocks, pumps, and mechanical figures were centuries ahead of anything being developed in Europe at the time. He was building robots, basically, using purely mechanical principles. Al-Jazari's work serves as a powerful reminder that innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum, and that the Middle Ages were a time of vibrant cultural exchange and cross-pollination of ideas. It also emphasizes how much of history gets written from a biased viewpoint. And who could forget the advancements in late medieval technology? From the surprisingly flexible and articulated armor that allowed knights to move with surprising agility on the battlefield, to the miniature combination locks and puzzle chests used to secure valuables, these were real-world applications of clever engineering. And the early experimentation with optics, with scholars like Roger Bacon and Ibn al-Haytham using the camera obscura to unlock the secrets of light and vision. These weren't just idle curiosities. They were crucial steps towards the scientific revolution that was to come. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's this: the Middle Ages were a time of incredible innovation. It's time to truly challenge the narrative that paints this period as stagnant and backward. We shouldn't underestimate the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the people who lived during this era. They were tackling complex problems, pushing the boundaries of knowledge, and creating technologies that would have a lasting impact on the world. These weren't just isolated incidents or lucky accidents. These inventions, these advancements, were the result of a sustained effort to understand the world, to solve practical problems, and to improve the lives of people living at the time. They laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution, for the industrial revolution, and for the modern world as we know it. The next time you hear someone dismiss the Middle Ages as a time of darkness and ignorance, remember the inventions we've discussed. Remember the clocks, the heating systems, the water wheels, the printing experiments, the navigational tools, the ingenious machines of Al-Jazari, the advanced armor, the locks, and the early optics. Remember that these innovations weren't just products of their time. They were also building blocks for the future. They were the seeds of modern science, engineering, and industry. They are a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity and a reminder that even in the midst of challenging times, innovation can flourish. The medieval period deserves a second look, a deeper understanding, and a whole lot more respect. It wasn't a technological dead end. It was a crucial chapter in the ongoing story of human innovation. And it's a story that's worth telling, worth remembering, and worth celebrating. It is a story in itself,